Okay, we'll continue on. Again, the focus here is an overview of the psychology of quality of life. It's a book that's published by Springer. I'm the author of the book. My name is Joseph Sergi, and we will continue to talk about the book. Uh, and we will focus on the third module, which is objective reality and the effects on happiness. So again, we'll focus on much of the research on, what is the objective reality or the dimensions of objective reality and how it affects people's happiness. This particular slide captures much of the dimensions of objective reality, and we'll be talking about those. So we'll be talking about the economic effects, uh, the political effects, sociocultural effects, effects of demographics, effects of personal activities, effects of the environment, the effects of genetics, effects of health, uh, effects from drugs, effects of biological factors, and so forth. So we'll talk about how those affect people's happiness. And we'll start out with the effects of the economy or the economic effects on happiness. So, looking at the economic effects on happiness, we can, capture much of the research in this area in terms of a two by two matrix. And the two by two matrix focuses on individual level effects and national level effects. So making that distinction. And again, we look at the effects in terms of short term versus long term. So focusing on the first quadrant, which is individual level effects, and these are essentially short term effects. People with higher incomes, on average, are happier than those with lower incomes with diminishing returns. That means much of the research has shown that people who have more money, higher incomes on average, tend to be happier than those people who have less money, but up to a point. Okay, what are the psychological explanations associated with those findings? Now, again, from the literature, there are three uh, explanations that seem to be well accepted by the scientific community. One is called the assets hypothesis, and the second one is self esteem, control, and optimism. They go together. And the third one is top down hypothesis. So let's describe those explanations. Again, what are we trying to explain? Is that people with higher incomes on average are happier than those with lower incomes, up to a point with diminishing returns. Okay, let's focus on the assets hypothesis. I'm going to read to you a paragraph from the book. Assets are valuables that provide some degree of positive financial return. Assets may include savings, stocks, bonds, vehicles, housing, and real estate. The concept of assets is different from income in that income represents the flow of money. Assets focus on stocks of wealth. Assets may have benefits that can translate into quality of life. These benefits include enhancing household stability, increasing future orientation, enhancing focus and specialization, decreasing risk taking, enhancing self efficacy, fostering social influence and civic engagement, and promoting child well being. An emerging body of research also shows that assets serve to mitigate economic hardship, increase marital satisfaction, enhance marital stability, and enhance self esteem and self efficacy, and also serve to increase life satisfaction. The assets hypothesis has been used to explain the effect of being married on subjective well being, the finding that by and large married people report higher levels of subjective well-being than non-married. Marital disruption, which is separation and divorce, also takes a toll on subjective well-being because it leads to financial distress, which may impact social participation, that is, participation in social activities. Participation in social activities costs money. Okay, well, that's the gist of what we call the assets hypothesis. The second explanation, which is the self-esteem, control, and optimism, and that is material resources through more money. When people have more money, they tend to have more control on their environment. And if that kind of control gives them a boost in self-esteem, and they become more optimistic in terms of what they can achieve in the future and how they will, what their future situation is likely to hold. So again, income does make a difference in terms of people's happiness. The third explanation, the top-down hypothesis, and this one is a little interesting, and that says that people who are happy, they tend to be more economically motivated. They tend to be more productive. They enjoy being productive. So because they are happy, they tend to make more money, right? The Now let's move to the second item. The looking at the national level effects on short term. So national level effects, short term effects. And we're looking at the bottom left hand quadrant of the matrix. And it says increases in national income, such as GDP, as the gross domestic product or the gross domestic product per capita, are associated with increases in happiness, especially in developing countries, again, up to a point. So the relationship holds at the national level, since that that countries that tend to be to have higher level of GDP or wealth, they tend to register higher level of happiness. People in those countries express more happiness than people in countries that are developing or poor. Um, but this relationship is much more pronounced within those developing countries. So that means you see people within poor countries who are richer than others. Those people are richer than others. They express a lot more happiness because of the contrast effect. I guess there's quite a bit of contrast effect. So what's the explanation that is provided in the literature about that? One explanation is called the bottom-up hypothesis. And the bottom-up hypothesis says that you have life satisfaction on top, and it is embedded in what you call a satisfaction hierarchy. And people are satisfied, or at least express satisfaction in life. They tend to make that judgment based on satisfaction in terms of the life domain. So if they're satisfied in their, when it comes to family, when it comes to their social life, when it comes to their work life, when it comes to the community life, when it comes to, spiritual life, and so forth. So that satisfaction with life comes from satisfaction with different domains, and especially in terms of how salient those domains. So there is a trickle up effect, a spillover between domain satisfaction and satisfaction with life. Now, people who are satisfied, that satisfaction in those different life domains tend to be induced by satisfaction with very specific events and satisfaction with very specific events, tend to be invested in those life domains that ultimately affect life satisfaction. So the idea then is that people, especially in developing countries, who have more wealth than others, they have more resources to buy things, and through those things that they buy and use from, we're talking about goods and services, um, to make them more happy in those different life domains. And if these things make them more happy in those different life domains, again, social life, family life, community life, and so forth, uh, that will spill over to life satisfaction in general. So that's the explanation of how people, especially in developing countries, um, tend to tend to feel happier if they have more wealth than others. Okay, moving on the right-hand side of the quadrant of the matrix, when we're looking at individual level effects and long term, so we're looking at things long term. Social scientists who have really looked into this, uh, they call it the Easterlin paradox, because Professor Richard Easterlin from the University of Southern California is the one who essentially documented this phenomena. And the phenomena is, well, yeah, things, happiness does not increase when people become wealthier. So when they have more income, it's not that the more income, over time, they become happier. This doesn't happen. You can only observe this phenomena cross-sectionally, but over time, again, this phenomenon dissipates for some reason. And the reason being essentially some explanations that have been provided, including Professor Easterlin, explanation, and one explanation is rising material aspirations, and that when people make more money, it's not that they become happier. They don't necessarily become happier. It's because their expectations rise, their material aspirations rise. So people adjust their material aspirations. So it's not that, oh, I got more money and I feel happier. No, I have more money and therefore I need more money because now my lifestyle is adjusted to a higher level. And therefore that money is needed to um, to allow me to maintain a certain lifestyle, a lifestyle that now I have, which I didn't have before because I didn't have the money for that lifestyle. So rising material aspirations can account for the fact that happiness does not rise with rise in income. Another types of explanation is that a rise in income, a rise in income does not necessarily produce happiness because it has a buffering effect. A buffering effect, so it it uh, it buffers the adverse effects of certain life events, stressful events. Again, if things go bad in life, then money allows you to, again, provide a cushion, a buffer, so to speak, that would um, um, prevent. you from feeling bad, feeling unhappy in life. So it has a buffering effect. So it's not that income allows you to experience more positive affect, meaning happiness. It allows you to experience less dissatisfaction with life. And therefore, that is a buffering effect that may explain that income does not necessarily, rise in income does not produce an equal rise in happiness. The last one, the last one is national effects, and we're talking about long-term effects. And again, we're dealing with the Easterlin paradox, and that is, even at the country level, when you look at differences, when a country's level of GDP increases, does that produce a proportional increase in happiness? And again, the Easterlin paradox says no, that is not necessarily the case. And one explanation that is provided to explain this is what we call homeostasis, or the homeostasis hypothesis. And the homeostasis hypothesis says that people have set points, that people are, in essence, born with a set point of happiness. And although that there are those fluctuations and things, that certain life events would allow us to experience a certain rise in happiness, or or maybe a dip in happiness as a function of whether the event is positive or negative, that we always come back to a set point, what you call a homeostatic balance. Um, uh, so, some people have a set point that is higher than others. Other people tend to have their set points as low, so their happiness tend to be lower than. So, uh, over time, um, so on the aggregate, um, people just revert back to their set points, and therefore any kind of rise or dips in something like GDP, uh, it translates on the individual level that, again, people go back to their set points, and and what they do is they maintain a homeostatic balance in terms of happiness. So you see almost like a flat line over time. And that's what concludes this section of the book on the economic effects of happiness.